Here we will talk about another phylum of leucotrophozoans related to the mollusks, phylum Annelida, the segmented worms. These are worms that are characterized of having a body built out of repeated units, which are divided by septae, or walls. Each segment has its own excretory, reproductive, locomotion structures, as well as ganglia. This allows for specialization because the segments can be different. They can be specialized for feeding or excretion or locomotion or reproduction. These are advanced worms with well-developed body systems. They have a distinct head with well-developed ganglia, a brain, and sensory organs like eyes. There's roughly around 32,000 described species of annelids. They occur in many habitats and they come in many sizes, up to 3 meters long, around 9 feet or so. Most annelids are gonochoric. They have separate sexes, and they have trochophore larvae, which mollusks also have, uniting the two together. Their phylogeny, like many other groups of organisms, is a rough draft. Up until fairly recently, it used to be more of a polyphyletic, not a monophyletic grouping. There used to be 3 classes, but now there's only 2, class Polychaeta, which are marine worms, and class Clitellata, which are freshwater and terrestrial worms. This figure shows some characteristics of phylum Annelida. You can see the repeated segments up here at the top, right? And then down here you can see that those segments are divided out by septae, right? Inside of the body there is a tube within a tube like body plan here, right? This inner tube is the GI tract. It has specialized parts like the esophagus and the intestine, and surrounding that we've got that coelom, gas-filled coelom, which acts as a hydrostatic skeleton against which the muscles of the worm can contract. So 2 groups of annelid worms. The first is class Polychaeta, more commonly known as the polychaete worms. Polychaete worms have many setae, right? So poly for many, chaete for setae. This includes clamworms, tube worms, and sea mice, and these guys are all found in marine habitats. They are a crucial part of the food web, especially where nutrients are scarce in the deep sea. They are characterized by having parapodia, paddle-like extensions on either side of the body, which can be seen here, parapodia, and parapodia over here too. The parapodia are covered with these setae or bristles and are used for locomotion, for anchoring, and also for gas exchange. These guys can use the parapodia then to burrow, swim, or crawl within the environment. Polychaete worms can either be active predators or they can be filter feeders living in tubes or burrows. These filter feeders can be symbiotic with sulfur oxidizing bacteria. So these guys are found around deep sea sulfur vents where the sun is not the main source of energy. This picture here is a good example of these filter feeding sulfur partnerships that these worms can form, right? Here, this is one of the few environments where the sun is not the primary source of energy, so these worms play a great service by linking that sulfur with the other organisms that can then use the worms for energy. These Christmas tree worms are another good example of filter feeding polychaete worms. Got some really brightly colored gills here, very pretty. And then these other 2, this one up here and this bristle worm down here, are good examples of the carnivorous free-living polychaete worms. The other class is maybe a bit more familiar. Class Clitellata is named for the clitellum, which is a thickened band that's found closer to the anterior end of the worm. All Clitellata have this clitellum. Included are the earthworms and the leeches. Earthworms are worms that have a head that is not well differentiated. They have no parapodia, but they do have a few setae that project from the body wall and allow the worm to anchor itself within the soil. These guys live within the soil throughout their whole lives. They eat through the soil, consuming the organic molecules found there and aerating and enriching the soil as they do so. Because they live underground, they don't need eyes, so that contributes to that head not being very differentiated from the back end. However, they do have light, chemical, and pressure receptors, so they definitely have sensory structures, they just don't have eyes. They don't need to see. Earthworms are hermaphroditic, but they do cross-fertilize, and to do that, they actually use that clitellum. That is used for copulation. It secretes mucus, holding the worms together, sometimes for days at a time as the gametes are exchanged. That's actually what's going on over here. These are two earthworms that are very much in love. After that fertilization occurs, the mucus from the clitellum can then create a cocoon for the eggs. The other major group here are the leeches. These occur mostly in freshwater, though there are some terrestrial and marine leeches. They are also hermaphroditic, and they also rely on cross-fertilization. You might be wondering where the clitellum is on this leech. Well, they do have them, but they only appear during breeding season. So if it's not breeding season, you won't see a clitellum. Leeches are characterized by having suckers at both ends of the body. These are used for feeding, but also for locomotion. A leech can also swim through the water. Leeches have no setae, they have no parapodia. They do not have any internal segmentation either. The coelom is not segmented. They can eat detritus and small animals, but they're probably most famous for sucking blood. In order to facilitate that, they have naturally occurring anticoagulants, vasodilators, and analgesics within their saliva. And because of that, they are still used medicinally today. Now, if you're familiar with something like Game of Thrones or period dramas, you might be familiar with leeching. Back in the day, leeches were used to treat diseases due to an excess of blood or an excess of bad blood. That is not what leeches are used for today, right? We know now that that is not the basis for a lot of these diseases. However, leeches are wonderful at reestablishing circulation. So in reattachment surgeries, for example, they can reestablish circulation, especially within tiny vessels like the ear or fingers, allowing the prognosis of those surgeries to become much better. Now we move on to the ecdysozoans. All right, so ecdysozoans, boom. These guys are organisms that need to molt to grow. And while there are several phyla, we'll be examining two in detail here, phylum Nematoda and phylum Arthropoda. These are the most abundant ecdysozoans. Phylum Nematoda, also called nematodes or roundworms, includes the vinegar eels, the eelworms, roundworms. Very abundant phylum. There's over 60,000 species that have been described, but estimates put them at maybe 100 times that. So tons and tons of nematodes all over the earth. Some nematode researchers say that if the whole earth were to disappear, you would still be able to see the outline of it just because of the nematodes that occur all over the earth. So super abundant, very diverse. There's members that are marine, freshwater, also some that live in the soil, and there's quite a few parasites of both plants and animals. These guys are bilaterally symmetrical worms. They are unsegmented. They are covered by a flexible yet thick cuticle that is molted as the animal grows in a process called ecdysis. Right? Ecdysis just equals molting. The nematode does not have respiratory organs. Instead, carbon dioxide and oxygen is exchanged through this cuticle. This figure from your book shows some common features of the nematode. You can see that very outer layer is that cuticle, right? You can see it a little bit better here. And then these guys are also pseudocoelomate, right? So that's what's going on here. There is that coelom, but as you can see, it's sandwiched between the mesoderm and the endoderm, so not completely enclosed within that mesoderm tissue. However, it is present, right? And it does have a benefit for the organism. It allows nutrients to circulate within the body. It provides a space for organs within the body. Things like the digestive system, the reproductive organs can live here. And you can see those reproductive organs. This is a male nematode, right? Testes. They're quite abundant, so they're highly coiled. They often run to and fro through the body, which allows the nematode's reproductive output to be quite large. Nematodes exhibit eutely, which means that the adults consist of a fixed number of cells. A great example is C. elegans, which is used in a lot of research. Every C. elegans has only 959 cells. And we know a lot about C. elegans. We know all about how the cells develop and how all the neurons are mapped out. It's used all over the world for genetic and developmental studies. Things like host pathogen interactions are still very commonly used nematodes. The lifestyle of a nematode includes both active predators and parasites. Predators will prey on protists or small animals. The parasites will parasitize both plants and animals. Every one has at least one parasitic nematode that affects it. So again, very, very diverse. These guys, like we saw in that diagram, are pseudocoelomates. They have quite advanced body systems. Finally, their reproduction is sexual. Most have separate sexes. They're gonochoric, males and females, and they exhibit sexual dimorphism, which means that there are two morphs, di for two, morph for two shapes, right, or structures. Male and female looks different. That's what sexual dimorphism is. How we see that in the nematode is that the female is larger, the male is smaller, and it has a hooked end that it uses to hold open the female's genital pore for reproduction. So, well, we're humans, so let's talk about the nematodes that affect us. There's about 50 that occur in people. Good example is the hookworm. These used to be common in the southern United States, but better sanitation has decreased the rate of infection. These live in the small intestine, and they are passed through the feces, so historically walking around barefoot often led to hookworm infections. They suck blood through the intestine, so they can result in anemia. So not so much of a problem anymore. More common in the U.S. now is the pinworm. These are the most common type of nematode infection we get. If you have kids, you may have heard of them. This causes itching within the anus because they live within the rectum and they come out to lay eggs. And well, little kids are not so great about washing their hands every time, right? So they can get eggs on their fingers, on their hands, and then spread them to other areas. They survive, the eggs survive about 2 weeks at room temperature. So they are very resilient, and it's very easy for other people to get infected that way. They're common, but fortunately do not result in more serious complications and are very easy to treat. Intestinal roundworms affect a lot of people, about 1 in 6 people worldwide, but we don't see them so much in the developed world. A good example of that is trichinosis, which is caused by eating undercooked pork. The nematode lives encysted within the muscle of the pork or wild game, so eating it undercooked can result in an infection. GI issues that can result then in organ inflammation. And then finally, serious tropical nematode diseases can occur too. Guinea worm is one of those right here. Elephantiasis is another one that affects the lymph nodes.